following video deals with mature subject matter which may not be suitable for younger children. Viewer discretion is advised.
Hi, I'm Daisy Boyden, and you're watching Hammerson Peters. For decades, men, women and children have vanished without a trace from a certain region in British Columbia's southern interior. In this series, we've investigated 21 of these cold cases and delved into strange native legends endemic to the area. Last week, we ended with a statement from the brother of one of the victims, who believes that there are commonalities between the vanishing of Luke Neville and the most recent wave of disappearances to haunt the British Columbia Triangle.
Another set of disappearances which definitely shared commonalities with that of Luke Neville was the vanishing of 38-year-old Ryan Provencher and 37-year-old Richard Scurr on July 17, 2019. That afternoon, at around 12:30, Provencher and Scurr were seen in South Surrey, in the Greater Vancouver area. Provencher has been described as a 5'10", 180-pound Caucasian male with a slim build, while Scurr has been described as a 6'4", 220-pound Caucasian male with an athletic build. Both men lived in Surrey at the time. The pair made a 3-hour drive up the Trans-Canada Highway to Spence's Bridge. This was a trip which Provencher made often, having business in the area at a particular property, the nature of which police have refused to disclose. The RCMP officers who later investigated the pair's disappearance said they have reason to believe the two men arrived at their destination. Provencher and Scurr did not return from their trip to Spence's Bridge and were reported missing soon afterward. On July 21st, 4 days after they were last seen, Provencher's white 2019 Jeep Cherokee was discovered, parked in a wooded area on a logging road near easterly Logan Lake. Unlike Luke Neville's vehicle, the brand new Jeep was not burned or damaged in any way. There were no signs of Provencher or Scurr in its vicinity, and no indications that anything untoward had occurred at the site. Reports on the discovery include what appear to be a number of strange and inconsistent geographical mistakes. Although all articles on the subject declared that the van was found near Logan Lake, most of them also claimed that it was found 100 kilometers or 62 miles east of Spence's Bridge. The town of Logan Lake is actually located 38 kilometers or 24 miles east of Spence's Bridge, while the body of water for which the town was named is located a mere 22 kilometers or 14 miles east of the latter. In a press release, the RCMP stated, quote, "Following the recovery of the Jeep, a search and rescue team, the Integrated Police Dog Services, and the RCMP Air 4 helicopter were dispatched to conduct a search of the vast wooded area," unquote. No sign of either Provencher or Scurr was found, and the police left the scene convinced that the two men were no longer in the area. Following the discovery of the abandoned Jeep, the RCMP's Southeast District Major Crimes Unit assisted both the Ashcroft and Lytton RCMP detachments in the investigation into Provencher and Scurr's disappearance, indicating the Mounties had reason to believe foul play was involved. On August 2nd, the investigators executed a search warrant on a rural property in Spence's Bridge, the same mysterious property on which Provencher purportedly had a business interest. The police spent several hours at the site, but neglected to inform the public of what, if anything, they found there. On August 17, 2019, exactly a month after the disappearance, the bodies of Ryan Provencher and Richard Scurr were discovered in a rural area about 80 kilometers north of Spence's Bridge. The RCMP officers who investigated the scene concluded that there was criminal behavior associated with the case, but refused to elaborate on the manner of the men's deaths. Speculation swirled around the case all summer. Mark Neville, the brother of Luke Neville, told reporters that he was struck by the undeniable similarities between the deaths of Provencher and Scurr and his brother's disappearance. "Logan Lake is only 50 kilometers as the crow flies from Spence's Bridge," he said. "Their vehicle was discovered on a Forest Service road, and we read that they were headed to Spence's Bridge. I mean, it just sounds so familiar," unquote. Corporal Eleanor Sturco of the Surrey RCMP responded to speculation that the case of Provencher and Scurr was related to the proximate disappearances of Luke Neville and Ben Tyner in a press meeting, saying, "I've been asked if there is any link to 2 open missing persons investigations in a similar area. Although our officers always look to see if there's relationship or linkages to any other ongoing investigations, they have not uncovered any information at this point that would suggest that this missing persons investigation is linked to any other missing persons investigations in the area at this time." Unquote. Some reporters from Prince George, British Columbia, made a compelling case that the deaths of Provencher and Scurr were related to organized crime, observing that Richard Scurr had been charged with a number of criminal offenses in his younger years, and had once been the leader of a Prince George street gang called the Crew. According to the RCMP, in the early 2000s, there were 3 main organized crime gangs in Prince George: the Renegades, the Independent Soldiers, and the Crew, all of which were affiliates of the Vancouver branch of the notorious outlaw biker gang Hells Angels. At the time of Scurr's involvement, an unmanned splinter group fractured from the Independent Soldiers and began a turf war with the other gangs, vying for control of the local drug trade. The ensuing violence prompted an RCMP crackdown on organized crime in BC's so-called Northern Capital, which caught Richard Scurr in its crosshairs. On March 11, 2005, Prince George RCMP officers inconspicuously tailed Scurr on his way to make a drug deal on a dead-end road at the northwestern edge of the city. The Mounties arrested Scurr during the transaction and found $25,000 worth of crack cocaine hidden beneath his vehicle's cup holder. The RCMP charged the 23-year-old with drug trafficking, and a BC court later sentenced him to 7 months of jail time and 2 years of probation, one of the conditions of which was that he stay out of the Prince George city limits. Considering his shady past, some reporters speculated that Richard Scurr and his acquaintance Ryan Provencher may have been murdered by members of the British Columbian underworld. Interestingly, Ryan Provencher and Richard Scurr disappeared during the height of 2 highly publicized Canadian manhunts, both of which share attributes eerily evocative of the recent wave of disappearances in the British Columbia Triangle. The more sensational of these 2 manhunts revolved around 18-year-old Bryer Schmegelsky and 19-year-old Cam McLeod, residents of the city of Port Alberni, located at the center of Vancouver Island, at the head of a long, narrow inlet extending from the Western Sea. For reasons known only to themselves, Schmegelsky and McLeod decided to go on a killing spree across northern Canada in the summer of 2019, leaving a 3,000-kilometer path of fear and destruction in their wake. Homemade videos later discovered by the RCMP indicate that the boys intended to hijack a ship in Hudson Bay at the end of their transcontinental rampage and sail across the Atlantic to Europe or Africa. On Friday, July 12, 2019, the teenagers left their homes in Port Alberni and headed east in McLeod's Dodge pickup truck, telling their parents that they had quit their new night shift jobs at Walmart and planned to find work in Alberta. They made the 1-hour drive to the city of Nanaimo, on the island's eastern coast, where they purchased an SKS semi-automatic carbine and a box of ammunition. McLeod already had his own SKS, which he had brought along with him. The pair took a ferry across the Salish Sea to Horseshoe Bay in West Vancouver. From there, they drove up the BC Highway 97. In 2 days, Schmegelsky and McLeod reached the village of Fort Nelson in northeastern British Columbia, where they filled up with gas. They continued northwest up the 97, driving through the Cassiar Mountains. That night, about 20 kilometers south of the Liard Hot Springs, they came upon another pair of travelers, 23-year-old Lucas Fowler of Australia and his girlfriend, 24-year-old China Deese of Charlotte, North Carolina, who appeared to be having car trouble. The globe-trotting couple were 2 days into a 3-week road trip they intended to make throughout Canada. The details of the encounter that ensued are a mystery. All we know for certain is that the back window of the couple's van was smashed from the inside out, and that Schmegelsky and McLeod shot Fowler and Deese to death from behind, leaving their bodies beside their minivan to be discovered early the next morning by a truck driver. From the Liard Hot Springs, the teenage murderers drove up the Alaska Highway through Whitehorse, Yukon. About 2 hours west of Whitehorse, incidentally, around the time that Ryan Provencher and Richard Scurr disappeared, they attempted to murder a motorist who had pulled over on the side of the highway to nap. The witness claimed that the young men parked their truck behind him in the ditch. One of the teenagers emerged from the vehicle holding a rifle and began to advance towards him with his weapon at the ready. The truck rolled slowly forward behind him. Alarmed, the witness sped away and was shortly overtaken by the truck, whose occupants shielded their faces as they accelerated past him. This incident likely prompted Schmegelsky and McLeod to turn their vehicle around and backtrack until they were 20 minutes west of Watson Lake, near the Yukon border. The pair headed down the Dease Lake Highway to the village of Dease Lake, British Columbia, in the northwestern section of the province. There, on Thursday, July 18th, they came across 64-year-old Leonard Dick, a marine biologist, botanist, and professor at the University of British Columbia, who was conducting field research at the time. Schmegelsky and McLeod murdered the unfortunate academic with a single bullet. Then, apparently experiencing difficulties with their own vehicle, they stole his Toyota RAV4. The teenagers torched McLeod's truck about 2 kilometers north of Dick's body and continued south. They stopped at the Tsimshian village of Kitwanga, about 420 kilometers south of the murder scene, where they filled up with gas and bought electrical tape at a hardware store. They used the tape to create black racing stripes on the hood and back tire of Dick's RAV4, effectively altering its appearance. Just south of Kitwanga, across the Skeena River, the boys turned east on the Yellowhead Highway. They drove across central British Columbia, perhaps passing through the city of Prince George. On Saturday, July 20th, they reached the town of Fairview, Alberta, in Peace River Country. By July 21st, they had arrived in Saskatchewan. On Monday, July 22nd, the RCMP announced that they considered Schmegelsky and McLeod the prime suspects in the second-degree murder of Leonard Dick, although they strangely neglected to implicate the teens in the deaths of Fowler and Dease. When the teenagers were spotted at a McDonald's restaurant in the northern Manitoba city of Thompson that day, the Mounties took up the pursuit. Later that evening, following a tip provided by a local Cree trapper, they discovered Dick's RAV4 burning in the woods near the northeasterly town of Gillam, Manitoba. The following day, the RCMP issued a warning to the residents of Gillam that Schmegelsky and McLeod were believed to be in the area and were considered dangerous. That afternoon, a crew of Mounties swept the surrounding woods and muskeg on foot. When night fell, an RCMP plane flew over the area, surveying it with an infrared scanner. The RCMP searched the wilderness around Gillam for 16 days, during which they found ammunition, a backpack, clothing, and a wallet belonging to the suspects. In total, the Mounties spent $1.5 million and searched 11,000 square kilometers of wilderness in their efforts to apprehend the desperados. In the end, the teenagers were discovered by Bill Beardy, a trapper of the local Fox Lake Cree Nation, who was incidentally the same man who first came across the boys' burning vehicle on June 22nd. On August 7th, while ferrying some RCMP officers down the Nelson River in his boat, Beardy noticed a raven fly out of a clump of riverside willows as he boated past, and suggested that the Mounties take a closer look at the area. The bodies of Bryer Schmegelsky and Cam McLeod were discovered on the banks of the Nelson River, near the mouth of a small creek. McLeod had evidently shot Schmegelsky with his SKS rifle, before turning the gun on himself. The RCMP later recovered 6 videos that the teenagers had shot on a digital camera, in which they confessed to the 3 murders of which they were suspected, and declared their intention to commit suicide once they realized that they would be unable to escape to the old world as they had planned. The second manhunt, in the midst of which Ryan Provencher and Richard Scurr's disappearance took place, which may actually have some connection with their case, was for Brandon Teixeira, a man from Surrey, British Columbia, in the Greater Vancouver area, whom contemporary American newspaper articles described as Canada's most wanted fugitive. Brandon Teixeira had already acquired a formidable reputation by the time he first fled from justice in the fall of 2017. On August 23, 2015, he allegedly stabbed 2 men in the neck during a brawl outside a nightclub in Maple Ridge, BC, nearly killing them both. The following summer, on June 26, 2016, he repeatedly stabbed a Surrey bouncer who had refused to let him into a nightclub. The bouncer survived his injuries. On October 22, 2017, 12 days after Luke Neville's burned-out van was discovered near Spence's Bridge, 26-year-old Brandon Teixeira and a 28-year-old acquaintance named Nicholas Cabra were allegedly shot at by an unknown assailant. Teixeira reputedly suspected that Cabra had orchestrated the attack in an attempt to kill him, and decided to murder him in revenge. His motivation to kill Cabra was supposedly bolstered by a $160,000 contract on the latter's head. According to a witness who later spoke with police, Brandon Teixeira arranged to meet with Cabra the next day on the pretext of purchasing fireworks from him. He joined Cabra in a Surrey cul-de-sac in a waterside neighborhood called Crescent Beach and spoke with him for about half an hour. When Cabra bent over to retrieve the fireworks from his car, Teixeira allegedly pulled out a gun and shot him several times in the back, fatally injuring him. He also reportedly shot Cabra's girlfriend, who had been waiting in the car. The wounded woman managed to slip into the driver's seat and drive away from the scene. Witnesses claim that Teixeira brought 2 black Jeeps to the murder scene in an effort to confuse the police. One of these vehicles was registered to his roommate, a man with the initials RP. The other, out of which the alleged crime was committed, had been rented from a Surrey business on October 1, 2017, under the name of the same roommate. Teixeira is alleged to have sped away from the scene of the crime in the second black Jeep, which was returned to the rental company the following day. The first vehicle, belonging to Teixeira's roommate, was driven to the southeasterly city of Langley, stripped of its license plate and burned. In the words of a news announcer who covered the incident on the night it occurred, "Recently, it's been a trend for suspects to torch getaway vehicles," unquote. Surrey RCMP responded to gunshot reports and found Nicholas Cabra lying near the scene, barely clinging to life, apparently having collapsed after attempting to enter a house. Cabra's girlfriend was found unconscious in the former's car nearby. The couple were rushed to the hospital, where Cabra succumbed to his wounds. On September 6, 2018, nearly a year after the homicide, Brandon Teixeira was charged with the first-degree murder of Nicholas Cabra, and the Mounties obtained a warrant for his arrest. That day, the Surrey RCMP's Integrated Homicide Investigation Team, or IHIT, attempted to arrest Teixeira at a home in southern Surrey. At least one area resident who witnessed the heavy police presence in the neighborhood reported hearing a brief exchange of gunfire. In a press briefing later that day, IHIT Media Relations Officer Corporal Frank Jong stated that the police had attempted to arrest Teixeira but were unsuccessful. Jong warned the public that the fugitive was at large in the Surrey area and was considered extremely dangerous. He released a photo of the wanted man and implored anyone who spotted him to report his presence to the police. "He may be hiding," Jong said. "He may be evading the police. He may be hiding out of sight from really everybody. But we're hoping because now that the community knows, now that they know his name or his photograph, if they spot him, if they have a glimpse of him, that's huge for us. That's a starting point for us," unquote. The RCMP searched for Brandon Teixeira for 15 months, concentrating their efforts in British Columbia's lower mainland and in the Albertan cities of Calgary and Edmonton, where the fugitive was known to have connections. On July 17, 2019, at the height of the manhunt, Ryan Provencher and Richard Scurr disappeared. In the fall of 2019, the RCMP received a tip that Teixeira was living in a remote rural property a half-hour's drive southwest of the city of Oroville, in Northern California. On December 1, 2019, a handful of detectives, U.S. Marshals, and 3 Californian SWAT teams descended upon the Oroville residence and ordered Teixeira to surrender himself. The fugitive came out of the property with his hands in the air and a cigarette in his mouth. After assessing the situation, he took one last drag of his cigarette, flicked the butt away, and made a desperate dash for his vehicle. He began to drive away, and nearly escaped the perimeter the SWAT teams had established when a policeman rammed his armored vehicle into the getaway car, pinning it against the residence. Teixeira was apprehended after being bitten by a police dog. Police later claimed to have found 26 pounds of heroin and 40 pounds of marijuana in his residence, an offense for which he was never charged. Brandon Teixeira was extradited to Canada in April 2020 to face the charge of first-degree murder. His extradition papers contained a startling detail, which may shed some light upon the fate of Ryan Provencher and Richard Scurr. One of the aliases that Teixeira had adopted in hiding, which was perhaps the name he used when he crossed the border into the United States, was Ryan Provencher. the same name as the man who disappeared from Spence's Bridge. Some keen-eyed journalists have observed that this alias's initial are the same as those of Teixeira's roommate in Surrey, the mysterious RP whose burned-out Jeep was discovered in Langley on the night of Cabra's murder, and whose name was used to sign out and return the getaway Jeep from the Surrey rental company. The most tempting speculations to be drawn from this observation are that Brandon Teixeira's old Surrey roommate was named Ryan Provencher, that this roommate was complicit, either willingly or unwittingly, in the October 23, 2018 murder of Nicholas Cabra, and that this roommate was the same Surrey-based Ryan Provencher who disappeared near Spence's Bridge with Richard Scurr on July 17, 2019. Neither the notoriously tight-lipped RCMP nor the perpetually punctilious reporters who populate Canada's mainstream media have publicly drawn those speculations out to their natural implications. Implications bolstered by the fact that Brandon Teixeira and Ryan Provencher bear a striking physical resemblance to each other, namely that and perhaps that Luke Neville, whose disappearance is remarkably similar to Provencher and Scurr's, was murdered for his silence after stumbling upon or running afoul of whatever shady enterprise necessitated the latter's frequent business trips to Spence's Bridge. Four months after Ryan Provencher and Richard Scurr's death, another man disappeared near the village of Darcy, about 20 miles or 33 kilometers northeast of Pemberton, in a manner very similar to Luke Neville. Marshal Iwaasa was a native of Lethbridge, Alberta, who had worked manual labor jobs in southern Alberta following his graduation from high school. Those who knew him described him as a kind soul who enjoyed the outdoors and had a passion for fitness and bodybuilding. In 2019, he left his home in Lethbridge for the northerly city of Calgary, Alberta, to study. The 26-year-old enrolled in a computer science program for the fall 2019 semester at the Southern Alberta Institute of Technology, a Calgary Polytechnic institute. Iwaasa endured a rough month prior to his disappearance. In November 2019, he dropped out of school after being put on academic probation on account of poor grades, a fact he neglected to mention to his family. Shortly thereafter, he failed to pay his cell phone bill, perhaps burdened by the same sort of financial difficulties that seem to plague most college students. On Sunday, November 17, 2019, Iwaasa drove to his hometown of Lethbridge in his dark blue GMC Sierra pickup truck, where he helped fix his mother's computer. At about 11 o'clock p.m., at the end of his visit, he told his mother, Tammy Johnson, and his sister, Paige Fogan, that he was heading back to Calgary. Before leaving town, Marshal Iwaasa paid a visit to a Calgary storage locker that he shared with his sister. Apparently not having realized that the gate to the storage facility would be locked, and not knowing the access code, he punched several sets of numbers into the gate keypad throughout the night. Eventually, he gave up and sat in his car, perhaps hoping to get a few hours of sleep before attempting the drive back to Calgary. At 6 o'clock a.m., when the gates to the storage facility finally opened up for the morning, Iwaasa unlocked the storage unit he shared with his sister and stayed in the facility for over 2 hours. He departed the area at around 8:30 and was never seen again. On Saturday, November 23rd, 6 days after Iwaasa's disappearance, a group of hikers bound for a remote alpine shelter called the Bryan Waddington Hut came upon a chilling sight on the rough Felix Creek logging road near the town of Darcy, northeast of Pemberton. "At the trailhead," said James Stark, one of the hikers, "we came across a pickup truck that had been completely torched, but it looked like it had been torched extremely aggressively. I mean, the glass was melted and the wheels had been blown off. It was completely destroyed," unquote. Investigators later determined that the burned-out truck was Iwaasa's, and that several automotive parts for which Marshal had recently paid were missing. Near the truck's charred skeleton, the acrid stench of which still hung heavily in the air, the hikers found a number of belongings scattered on the ground. The hikers took photos of the scene. They found Iwaasa's expired passport, along with a newer passport with the identification page torn out. They also found 3 smashed cell phones, a destroyed laptop, a PlayStation, an Xbox, some clothing, and some toiletries. Iwaasa's family later identified the cell phone, laptop, and clothing as Marshal's, but did not recognize the gaming consoles. Conspicuously absent from the miscellanea were Marshal's contact lenses, contact solution, backpack, wallet, and most recent cell phone, In Stark's opinion, it appeared as though someone had been trying to destroy evidence, a theory which he conceded did not make total sense, as the passports, cell phones, and laptop could have been destroyed far more efficiently if they had been immolated along with the truck. The hikers reported the ominous discovery to the RCMP the following day, when they came within cell phone reception. The RCMP investigated the scene on Monday, November 25th. Strangely, many of the items that the hikers had photographed appeared to be missing, as if someone had tampered with the scene following the hikers' departure. The RCMP informed Iwaasa's family that they had found Marshal's burned-out truck, prompting Marshal's sister, Paige, to file a missing persons report with the Calgary Police Service. After coming across security camera footage of Marshal Iwaasa at his Calgary storage locker on November 27th, the Calgary Police transferred his case to the Lethbridge Police Service, which handled it in conjunction with the RCMP. Investigators quickly learned of the woes that Iwaasa had experienced in the weeks leading up to his disappearance, and developed the theory that the 26-year-old may have driven into the mountains with the intention to end his life. Iwaasa's family members vehemently rejected this suggestion, stating that Marshal had no history of mental illness and had never exhibited suicidal ideation in the past. Early into their investigation, the RCMP and Lethbridge Police made the confusing statement that Iwaasa's case was considered suspicious, but that they had not yet uncovered any, quote, credible, corroborated, or compelling information to suggest foul play, or that the occurrence is criminal in nature, unquote. A private investigator hired by the Iwaasa family concluded that the young man's truck did not burn as a result of some unfortunate accident, but was rather intentionally set on fire. Lethbridge Police and members of the Pemberton RCMP suspended their search on account of snowmelt in late November, before resuming it again on June 24, 2020. For 5 days, 12 police officers, 15 search and rescue personnel from Pemberton and Squamish, a canine unit consisting of 8 cadaver dogs, 8 private searchers, a drone operator, and a helicopter conducted what has been described as an exhaustive ground search of the wilderness surrounding the Felix Creek logging road for any sign of Marshal Iwaasa. "We wanted to search the whole road in and out from where the truck was found," said Dave Hasty, a retired Lethbridge police staff sergeant who helped organize the operation. "We did 200 meters on each side of it, and it's very rough, with streams and that sort of thing. We wanted to do up past where the truck was as far as we could. It took a while because we had to ATV everyone up and down," unquote. Despite the thoroughness of the search, the only traces of Iwaasa that the investigation discovered were some clothes in the forest on a trail leading away from the vehicle, and some additional clothing nearby at the edge of a creek. In the months that followed, Iwaasa's family spearheaded a campaign to persuade the RCMP and Lethbridge Police to treat Marshal's case as a criminal matter, rather than a missing person case, which would give investigators more freedom and access to additional resources. The Lethbridge Police Service responded to the campaign with a public statement, in which they reiterated their earlier claim that although Iwaasa's case has always been considered suspicious, investigators have not uncovered sufficient evidence to warrant its upgrade to criminal status. In an interview with reporters, Marshal's sister, Paige, expressed her suspicion that her brother's disappearance might be connected in some way with the other recent missing persons cases in BC's southern interior. "I certainly think that there's something," she said, "whether this area does happen to be higher for dumping vehicles and burning them, or whether there's something else going on."
As is the case with most locals in which an inordinate number of mysterious deaths and disappearances seem to occur, it is tempting to ascribe the unsolved vanishings of the British Columbia Triangle to a single underlying agent. Perhaps a serial killer stalks the hills of the northern Okanagan and the ravines of the Fraser Canyon. Perhaps, as the interior Salish have long maintained, supernatural predators and ancient mysteries prowl the wilderness of Lillooet country in the Thompson Plateau. Or perhaps the disappearances of the British Columbia Triangle are all attributable to unique and unrelated causes, united only by their close proximity to each other, and certain coincidental commonalities between the circumstances that surround them. If there is any certainty that we can glean from the mysterious tragedies that have haunted this beautiful country, it is the knowledge that there is strength in numbers, and that it's always safer to stick together than to wander alone in the woods.